In the middle of a blinding snowstorm, a billionaire loses his way until a 5-year-old girl quietly offers him shelter. She isn't asking for help. She's sharing what little warmth she has. One small choice changes everything, exposing hidden truths and rewriting both of their futures forever. The blizzard erased Chicago block by block. Snow fell sideways, thick and relentless, turning the lakefront streets into a white corridor with no edges. Headlights vanished 10 feet ahead. Traffic lights blinked like tired eyes fighting sleep. Graham Vale stepped out of his stalled sedan, the wind biting instantly through his tailored coat. His driver shouted something he couldn't hear. It didn't matter. The road ahead was sealed by snowplows and police tape. The meeting across town, his meeting was already slipping away. Graham checked his watch. Out of habit, out of anger. That's when he heard it. Not a scream, not a cry. Just a small voice, steady and clear, carried by the wind. "Mister, are you lost?" He turned. Behind a snow-covered bus shelter stood a little girl, no more than 5 years old. She wore a knit hat that slid over one eye and mittens too big for her hands. Her boots were mismatched but clean. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She was watching him. "There's less wind here," she said, stepping aside. "You can stand." Graham hesitated. Every instinct told him to keep moving. Storms didn't wait. Schedules didn't care. But something in her tone stopped him. She wasn't asking. She was offering. He stepped under the shelter. The wind softened immediately. Up close, he noticed the faint plastic band around her wrist, white hospital-issued, slightly bent. "You're very polite," Graham said, unsure why. That was the first thing he chose to say. "My Nana says we should be," the girl replied. "I'm Emmy." The snow howled again, louder this time. Graham looked down at her small face, calm in the middle of chaos. For the first time that night, the storm wasn't the coldest thing he felt. Emmy lifted the paper cup in her mittened hands. Inside were a few crackers, broken but neatly stacked, as if someone had taken care arranging them. "I share," she said simply. Graham stared at the cup. He hadn't realized he was hungry until that moment, but hunger wasn't what tightened his chest. It was the certainty that those crackers were all she had. "You keep them," he said quickly. She shook her head. "Nana says sharing makes storms smaller." The sentence landed harder than the wind ever could. Graham slipped off his scarf, thick cashmere still warm from his neck. He wrapped it loosely around Emmy's shoulders, careful not to startle her. She looked down at it, eyes widening just a little. "Thank you, mister," she said. "You're nice." Nice. No one had called him that in years. Snow piled against the shelter's glass. Sirens echoed somewhere far away, softened by the storm. The city felt paused, like the world had taken a breath and forgotten to exhale. "Are you waiting for someone?" Graham asked. Emmy nodded. "A grown-up. They said stay where helpers can find you." That answer was too practiced, too responsible. Graham noticed again the band on her wrist. Hospital plastic. Recent. "Is your family at the hospital?" he asked gently. "My Nana," Emmy said. "She's sleepy today." Something in the way she said it, careful, hopeful, told him this wasn't a simple visit. Graham pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course. The wind surged again, shaking the shelter. Emmy took a cracker, broke it in half, and offered him the larger piece. He took it. Not because he needed it, but because refusing felt wrong. As he ate, Graham realized something unsettling. He had walked into this storm thinking about money, power, timing. And now a 5-year-old girl was teaching him how to stand still. The hospital wristband peeked out again when Emmy adjusted the scarf. Graham crouched slowly so they were eye level. "That band," he said softly. "Did you visit the hospital today?" Emmy nodded. "Lakeview Mercy. Nana's there. Is someone with her right now?" "The nurses," Emmy answered. "They're kind." That didn't answer the question he hadn't asked yet. "How did you get here?" Graham said. The shuttle, she replied, but it stopped. The snow got too loud. Too loud. That was how a child described a blizzard. Graham exhaled slowly. Do you know where you're supposed to go if that happens? Emmy pointed to the bus shelter sign half buried in snow. Emergency warning, stop. A lady told me this is safe, she said. She said helpers look here first. That sentence mattered. It meant Emmy hadn't wandered. She hadn't been careless. She had followed instructions. Graham straightened his jaw, tightening not at the child, but at the idea of a system that left a 5-year-old alone to be this responsible. I think we should go see your Nana, he said carefully. Would that be okay? Emmy's eyes brightened just a little. Yes, please. He flagged down a taxi, creeping through the snow, its tires whining against ice. As they slid into the back seat, Emmy pressed her mitten to the window, watching the city blur into white shapes and yellow lights. You live here? She asked. Yes, Graham said. Then you know where warm places are? She said, satisfied. The taxi crawled forward, swallowed by the storm. Graham checked his watch again, then turned it face down. For the first time, he didn't care what time it was. He cared about getting a 5-year-old girl back to the one person who made her feel safe. And he had a quiet feeling that the storm outside was only the beginning. The taxi moved like it was thinking. Every block took patience. Tires slid, corrected, slid again. Snow swallowed the sidewalks and softened the city into a quiet maze of light and shadow. Graham sat back, Emmy beside him, her boots not quite touching the floor. She hummed softly, something tuneless, comforting, like she was keeping herself company. His phone buzzed. Calder Rusk. Graham stared at the name, then at the child beside him. He answered. Graham Calder's voice was smooth, unbothered by weather. Still planning to impress me tonight, I'm delayed, Graham said. A pause. Not long, but sharp. By a blizzard, Calder asked lightly. Or by something else? Graham looked at Emmy. She was tracing a circle on the fogged window with one mitten. Something else, Graham replied. Another pause. Longer this time. Well, Calder said, still polite, don't let a small inconvenience cost you a big future. The call ended. The taxi turned toward the hospital, its lights glowing through falling snow like a promise. Emmy looked up. Is that where Nana sleeps? Yes, Graham said. That's where she is? Emmy nodded, satisfied. She doesn't like sleeping alone. Neither did he suddenly. The car slowed near the entrance. Hospital staff hurried in and out, shoulders hunched, faces tired but focused. The building stood firm against the storm-warm light, against endless white. As Graham opened the door for Emmy, snow rushed in like a held breath released. He helped her down carefully. Inside, heat wrapped around them instantly. And with it came a quiet realization. Whatever deal he was missing tonight, he wasn't missing the important part. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and warm air. Emmy walked with small, careful steps, her hand tucked into Graham's coat pocket, as if it belonged there. No one questioned it. In moments like this, kindness often went unnoticed and unquestioned. They stopped at a glass wall. Inside, machines blinked softly. A woman lay still beneath white blankets, her gray hair neat, her face peaceful. Emmy rose onto her toes. That's Nana June, she whispered. She's brave. A nurse approached, her voice gentle. Hello again, sweetheart. You remember me? Emmy said, surprised. The nurse smiled. Of course I do. She looked at Graham, professional but kind. Family A friend, Graham said. It felt honest. The nurse nodded. She's stable, resting. We're still waiting on a few approvals. Approvals, Graham repeated. Yes, she said carefully. It's routine. Just taking longer than usual. Emmy pressed her palm to the glass. Nana hates waiting. I know, the nurse said softly. They moved aside so others could pass. Emmy sat on a plastic chair, swinging her legs, patience practiced beyond her years. She reads to me, Emmy said, even when she's tired. Graham looked back at Nana June, a woman who had clearly raised a child to be calm, polite, and trusting despite uncertainty. How long has she been here? He asked. The nurse hesitated. A few weeks. Too long for something routine. Graham felt something tighten, not fear, not anger. Resolve. He asked to speak with the patient advocate, with billing, with anyone who could explain why routine had become indefinite. Behind him, Emmy hummed again. Soft, steady, like she believed waiting would work because it always had before. The word came up again. Delayed. It appeared on screens in quiet explanations in apologetic tones. Not denied, not refused, just delayed. Graham sat across from a tired administrator who spoke carefully, as if choosing words that wouldn't leave fingerprints. It's paperwork, the man said. Insurance verification. Scheduling priorities. Priorities, Graham repeated. Yes, the administrator said. Unfortunately. Graham didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply asked questions, precise ones, about timelines, about options, about advocates. And then he made an offer. I'll cover the costs, he said. Privately, legally, I want a patient advocate assigned today. The administrator blinked. That would help. In the hallway, Emmy waited with a nurse coloring on a clipboard. She had drawn a house with smoke coming out of the chimney. That's warmth, she explained proudly. It means people are inside. Graham knelt beside her. Your Nana's going to get help, he said. Soon. Emmy looked at him seriously. You promise, I promise, I'll do everything right, he said. The right way. She nodded, satisfied. Trust offered carefully but fully. Detective Renee Alvarez arrived quietly, her badge visible but her tone calm. She listened, asked questions, took notes. We'll do this properly, she said. For the child. For the grandmother. Outside, the storm continued to fall. Inside, something shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just enough to change the direction of everything. Graham noticed the name before anyone said it out loud. It was printed neatly on a framed poster near the elevator bank just beneath a slogan about community renewal. Northline Redevelopment Proud Partner. He stared at it longer than necessary. Emmy tugged gently at his sleeve. That name's everywhere. What do you mean? Graham asked. In Nana's old building, Emmy said. On papers, on doors, on a big sign that said soon. Soon. Another word that sounded harmless until it wasn't. Renee Alvarez joined them by the wall, following his gaze. Northline's been busy, she said evenly. Buying, rebuilding. Fast. Too fast, Graham asked. Renee didn't answer directly. Fast enough that a lot of families had to make decisions quickly. Emmy sat on a bench, swinging her legs. Nana said the papers were confusing. Graham looked at her. Confusing how they said we could stay. Or go. Emmy said slowly, choosing her words. But going sounded like the only nice choice. Renee's pen paused. What happened after Graham asked? Emmy shrugged. We packed some things. Nana said we'd be okay. She said it like she believed it. Renee folded her notebook closed. Northline works with a family assistance program, she said. Temporary housing, child support services. On paper, it's clean. On paper, Graham repeated. Snow pressed against the tall windows. Outside, the city was still buried. Inside, the story was beginning to surface. Emmy looked up at Graham. Nana doesn't like papers that rush you. Graham nodded. Neither did he. They found the brochure in a waiting area. Bright colors, happy faces, clean fonts, bright haven pathways, guidance for families during urban renewal. Graham picked it up, flipping through pages filled with reassuring words. Structure, opportunity, stability. This one, Emmy said, pointing. That's the name. Renee leaned over. Did someone talk to you about this program? Emmy nodded. A man with shiny shoes. Graham's jaw tightened. He said I could go to a place with lots of kids. Emmy continued. And Nana could rest. And what did Nana say? Renee asked gently. Emmy smiled. She said thank you, but no. That mattered. Did they explain what happens if families say no? Graham asked. Emmy shook her head. They just smiled more. Renee exhaled slowly. That tracks. Graham closed the brochure. I was supposed to meet Northline's director tonight, he said. Calder Rusk. Renee looked at him. He's charming. That wasn't a compliment. Do you think this program is hurting kids? Graham asked. Renee chose her words carefully. I think it uses confusion, and confusion can move people places they didn't mean to go. Emmy slid off the bench and stood between them. Nana says if something feels twisty, you stop. Graham crouched again, meeting her eyes. You did the right thing. She nodded as if that answer had been waiting. Outside, the storm roared on. Inside, Graham realized the blizzard wasn't the danger. The danger was what happened quietly while everyone was distracted. Renee didn't rush. She made calls, verified names, checked timestamps. This stays clean, she said firmly. No shortcuts, no misunderstandings. Graham agreed immediately. They moved to a small office near the nurse's station. Emmy sat at the desk, coloring again this time, drawing two people under a roof, snow falling outside. Renee spoke into her phone. Yes. Emergency temporary guardianship. Child is safe, supervised, and reunited with a responsible adult who brought her to the hospital. She ended the call and turned to Graham. Family court can approve a short-term arrangement tonight. Graham nodded. Whatever it takes. Emmy looked up. Am I in trouble? Renee knelt beside her. No, sweetheart. You did everything right. Graham added. This just means we make sure everyone knows where you are so no one worries. Emmy considered that. Nana worries. She won't have to, Graham said. Renee stood. There will be questions. From agencies, from Northline. I'm ready, Graham replied. He meant it, because somewhere between the bus shelter and the hospital glass, his priorities had shifted. Emmy held up her drawing. This is when Nana comes home. Graham smiled softly. That's the plan. Outside, the snow began to fall slower. Not stopping, just easing. Enough to remind them storms don't end all at once. They end one careful step at a time. The call came while Graham was signing forms. Not rushed, not angry. Calder Rusk's name lit the screen like a familiar shadow. Graham stepped into the hallway before answering. You disappeared, Calder said calmly. That's unlike you. A blizzard rearranged my priorities, Graham replied, a soft laugh on the other end. Chicago does that. Still, our meeting mattered. It still does, Graham said. Just not tonight. Silence followed. Measured. Intentional. I hear you're at Lakeview, Mercy, Calder said at last. Northline helped fund their winter upgrades. Small city? Graham's jaw tightened. I didn't realize hospitals were part of our negotiation. They're not, Calder said lightly. People are. Graham glanced through the glass. Emmy sat at a desk swinging her legs, talking quietly to a nurse while coloring. She looked safe. Calm. She's 5, Graham said. Another pause. You mean the Carter child? Calder replied. Brighthaven flagged her file weeks ago. That won't be happening, Graham said evenly. Calder sighed, not annoyed. Disappointed. Graham, Brighthaven exists to help families transition. Temporary structure. Stability. She has family, Graham said. And a plan. A fragile one, Calder countered. Hospitals discharge. Housing shifts. Children need consistency. So do neighborhoods, Graham said. The edge finally surfaced. Be careful, Calder warned softly. Confusion cuts both ways. The line went dead. Graham stood still for a moment, letting the words settle. Inside the office, Renee finished speaking with family court. Emergency guardianship approved, she said. Short term, fully reviewed. Graham nodded, relief sharp and sudden. Emmy ran over. "The nurse likes purple too," she announced, holding up her drawing. "That's good taste," Graham said. Renee watched them, thoughtful. "Northline won't push directly," she said. "They'll use process. Then we'll use it better," Graham replied. Outside, the storm pressed against the windows. Inside, the room had changed. Not louder, just heavier with purpose. Graham's house had never felt so large. Lights glowed softly against tall windows. Heat hummed through polished halls. Everything was orderly, untouched by chaos. Emmy stepped inside slowly, eyes wide. "It echoes," she whispered. "That's because it's been too quiet," Mrs. Dalloway said, gently appearing with a folded blanket. "We'll fix that." She knelt, wrapping Emmy carefully, as if warmth were something to be offered, not assumed. "Hot chocolate?" Mrs. Dalloway asked. "With marshmallows?" Emmy asked hopefully. "Always," Mrs. Dalloway replied. Graham watched from the doorway, hands in his pockets, unsure where to stand in his own home. Emmy explored small wonders, a lamp she could turn on herself, a window that didn't rattle, a bathroom mirror that fogged when she breathed on it. "This place doesn't hurry," she said. Graham swallowed. "It doesn't have to." Later, Renee arrived with paperwork and a calm authority that filled the room without force. "This is temporary," she explained to Emmy, crouching. "Just until Nana's strong again." Emmy nodded. "Temporary means safe." "Yes," Renee said. "Exactly." They spoke privately afterward. "Rusk will challenge this," Renee said. "Not with threats. With filings." "I'm prepared," Graham replied. Renee studied him. "This will get public. So should the truth." Emmy fell asleep on the couch, cocoa-forgotten blanket pulled to her chin. Graham adjusted it carefully. "She trusts fast," Renee observed. "She had to," Graham said quietly. When Renee left, Mrs. Dalloway lingered. "You did the right thing," she said simply. Graham looked at the sleeping child. "I'm just trying not to do the wrong one." Outside, snow fell gently now, less violent, more patient. Inside, for the first time in years, Graham's house listened. Morning arrived without sunlight. Snow still covered everything, smoothing the city into quiet lines. Graham hadn't slept. Papers lay spread across his desk, Brighthaven brochures, Northline filings housing transfer notices. Everything was legal. That was the problem. Evan Hart arrived just after dawn, coat dusted with snow, expression calm and alert. "I've reviewed the guardianship," Evan said. "Solid, temporary, clean," and Brighthaven, Graham asked. Evan sighed, carefully worded. "Consent forms are dense. Families are encouraged to decide quickly." "Encouraged how?" Graham asked. "With optimism," Evan replied. "And timing." They sat in silence for a moment. In the doorway, Emmy appeared, dragging her blanket behind her. "I had a dream Nana was awake," she said. "She will be," Graham replied. Evan smiled gently. "Good morning, Emmy. I'm Evan. My job is to make sure grown-ups do what they promise." Emmy considered this. "That's a big job." "It is," Evan agreed. Later, Renee called. "Northline filed a notice of interest," she said. "They're requesting Brighthaven placement review for Emmy." Graham closed his eyes briefly. "On what grounds?" "Existing intake paperwork. Old, questionable. Can they force it?" "Not without a hearing," Renee said. "Judge Benton will want facts." "Then we'll bring facts," Graham said. He looked at Emmy, now drawing again, this time a picture of a building with many doors. "What's that?" he asked. "A place where everyone gets to choose," she said. Graham felt something settle inside him. Papers didn't sleep. Neither did systems. But neither did people who decided to pay attention. And for the first time, Graham understood this wasn't about rescuing a child. It was about refusing to let quiet pressure decide her future. The hearing room was smaller than Graham expected. No windows, no grand seal on the wall, just a long table, muted lights, and the quiet hum of a building doing its job. This wasn't a courtroom meant for spectacle. It was designed for decisions. Judge Marisol Benton entered without ceremony. She didn't rush. She didn't smile. She simply sat, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the people in front of her, as if weighing gravity itself. "Let's be clear," she said. "This is a temporary guardianship review, not a debate about urban development." Graham nodded once. Across the table, Northline's attorney placed a neat folder down. Everything about him was tidy. Even his concern looked organized. "Your Honor," the attorney began, "Bright Haven Pathways exists to support families during housing transitions. Miss Carter was identified for services prior to her grandmother's hospitalization." Judge Benton raised a hand. "Identified does not mean placed." The attorney smiled politely. "Of course. But delays occurred. Delayed again." Evan Hart leaned forward. "With respect, Your Honor, those delays left a 5-year-old child without direct supervision during a blizzard. The current arrangement corrected that immediately, lawfully, and safely." Judge Benton turned to Graham. "Mr. Vale, why are you involved?" Graham didn't stand. He didn't posture. "Because she was there," he said simply, "and because the system moved slower than the weather." Silence followed. Judge Benton looked down at her notes. Detective Alvarez submitted a timeline. The grandmother's medical approvals stalled shortly after housing relocation paperwork was declined. The attorney shifted. "Correlation does not imply, it implies questions," the judge said calmly. "And children are not collateral while we answer them." Emmy was not in the room. That mattered. Judge Benton continued. "I will not place a child into a program under review when a stable temporary alternative exists." She signed the order with a firm stroke. Temporary guardianship extended. Independent review of Bright Haven procedures authorized. Graham felt the tension release not as relief, but as responsibility settling deeper. Outside the room, Evan exhaled. That bought us time. Time for what Graham asked. For clarity, Evan replied. And daylight. Bright Haven Pathways looked like a promise. Glass walls, clean lines, a welcome desk that smiled before it spoke. Posters showed children laughing under words like focus and future. Calder Rusk met them personally. "Graham," he said warmly, "I'm glad you're curious." Curious was a generous word. They walked the halls. Everything gleamed. Everything behaved. A classroom came into view. Children sat neatly, coats hung perfectly. They looked safe, fed, calm. Too calm. Graham noticed the way instructions were posted, not suggestions but sequences. Sit. Listen. Complete. Structure helps, Calder said, especially for children from unstable environments. Evan nodded politely. And family contact. Calder smiled. Scheduled. Consistent. How often, Graham asked. Calder's smile didn't falter. As appropriate. They moved on. A child looked up briefly. No fear, no distress, just a flicker of curiosity quickly folded back into routine. Graham raised his hand slightly and waved. The child hesitated, then gave the smallest wave back. Calder didn't notice. In a conference room, glossy charts appeared. Outcomes, percentages, arrows pointing upward. "We guide," Calder said. "We don't force." "Guidance requires choice," Graham replied. Calder leaned back. "And choice requires understanding. Families are overwhelmed. We simplify." "By removing options?" Evan asked. Calder's tone stayed smooth. "By prioritizing outcomes." Graham stood. "Thank you for the tour." Calder blinked. "Already I've seen enough," Graham said. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world looked paused between breaths. "That wasn't dangerous," Evan said quietly. "That's what makes it dangerous." Graham nodded. Control didn't need cruelty. It only needed compliance. Evidence arrived without drama. Emails, timelines, consent forms highlighted where language narrowed choice instead of expanding it. Housing notices delivered just before medical delays. Program referrals dated earlier but activated later. All legal. all troubling. Detective Renee Alvarez laid everything out on the table in Graham's study. No villains, she said. Just pressure. Evan added, and pressure moves people who don't have room to resist. Emmy sat nearby building a tower from wooden blocks. She concentrated carefully. Careful, she said. If you rush, it falls. No one laughed. They prepared for the full hearing. Judge Benton requested testimony from community advocates, from medical staff, from housing counselors who admitted quietly that families were encouraged to decide fast. On the morning of the hearing, Emmy hugged Graham's coat. "You'll come back?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "And Nana," she added. "She's stronger every day." Emmy nodded, satisfied. In court, Judge Benton listened. She asked questions that peeled away assumptions. She paused when answers circled instead of landed. Finally, she spoke. This court finds that while Brighthaven Pathways operates within legal boundaries, its application during housing transitions requires stricter safeguards. She looked directly at Calder Rusk. Children are not efficiency problems. Her ruling followed measured firm, guardianship maintained, program placements paused pending reform, oversight mandated, outside cameras waited. Graham didn't stop. He went home. Emmy ran to him. Did it work? He knelt. "It's working." She smiled. "Good. Nana says good things take time." Graham looked out the window at a city still covered in white. For the first time, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The city looked different once the blizzard stopped. Not prettier, just exposed. Snowbanks sat like frozen decisions along every curb. The sun didn't warm anything, but it did something else. It made the shadows obvious. And in Chicago, shadows were where paperwork learned to hide. Graham Vale stood at the kitchen island, while Mrs. Dalloway set a small plate of toast in front of Emmy. The little girl sat in an oversized chair wrapped in a cardigan that smelled like clean laundry and quiet patience. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't trembling. She was simply watching. Her eyes tracked everything like she was learning the shape of safety. "You're not eating," she observed, pointing at Graham's untouched coffee. "I'm thinking," Graham said. Emmy nodded like that made sense. "Nana says thinking is eating, but for your heart." Graham almost smiled. Almost. Evan Hart arrived with 2 folders and a calm expression that always made the room feel more organized than it was. "We have a timeline," Evan said. "We have the medical advocate's notes. We have community testimony. Judge Benton's order mandates oversight," and Northline Graham asked. Evan set one folder down. "They're pivoting to optics, press statements, philanthropic headlines, enhanced child support protocols." Renee Alvarez stepped in behind him, coat still dusted with salt from the roads. "No one admits wrongdoing," she said. "They don't have to. They only have to look cooperative." Graham's jaw tightened. "And Brighthaven's review scheduled," Renee replied. "Independent auditors, not affiliated with Northline, court-appointed." Mrs. Dalloway quietly cleared the breakfast plate and guided Emmy toward the living room. "We're going to pick out a book," she told Emmy, voice light. "A storm day story without storms." Emmy brightened. A warm story. When the child was out of earshot, Renee lowered her voice. "There's more. Calder Rusk requested a private meeting. He wants you to talk like adults." "Adults talk in court," Graham said. "Exactly," Renee replied. "But he's trying to make it personal, less official." Graham took a slow breath. "Schedule it. In a public place. With Evan present. Everything documented." Evan nodded approvingly. "That's the daylight test." They met Calder Rusk in a downtown hotel lounge, polished and bright like the world had never been covered in snow. Calder rose, flawless suit, warm handshake. "Graham," he said, smiling, "I'm glad you've returned to reason." Graham didn't sit immediately. He looked Calder in the eye. "I returned to responsibility." Calder's smile held. That too. They sat. Evan stayed slightly to the side, quiet as a witness. Calder spoke gently, almost sympathetically. You've been under stress. You found a child in a blizzard. It moved you. It's human. It was human before I noticed, Graham replied. Calder sighed like a man trying to be patient with someone being stubborn. You've turned a transition program into a scandal. That affects real families, real jobs, real children, Graham said. Calder's eyes softened in a practiced way. We're improving procedures, adding more staff, more transparency. If you help me stabilize this, we can build the kind of redevelopment Chicago needs. Graham leaned forward, voice quiet but steady. Then you won't mind independent oversight. Calder's smile narrowed by 1 degree. Oversight is fine. Public suspicion is not. That suspicion is the only reason oversight happened, Graham said. Calder tapped the table once, like punctuating a point. Emmy Carter. She's safe with you. That's good. But do you want her name in headlines? Do you want reporters turning her life into a story? Graham's expression didn't change, but something inside him did. Not fear, a hard line. No, Graham said. Which is why you'll stop mentioning her. Calder blinked, surprised by the directness. Evan spoke for the first time. The child's identity is protected. Any public reference risks violating court ethics. Calder raised his hands as if wounded. Of course. I meant no harm. Graham stood. Then we're aligned. You'll cooperate with the audit. You'll provide full documentation. You'll support community stabilization, not just glossy brochures. Calder rose as well, smile returning like a mask resealed. Graham, you always were intense. I used to be indifferent, Graham replied. This is better. Outside the city glittered in cold sunlight. The snow still covered everything, but it was no longer falling. And in that pause, Graham understood the new rule of his life. If something couldn't survive daylight, it didn't deserve to survive at all. Judge Marisol Benton ran her courtroom like a lighthouse. No drama, no applause, no theatrics. Just a steady beam of questions aimed at whatever tried to drift through on fog and confidence. The hearing wasn't criminal. It wasn't a public spectacle. It was an oversight review, exactly the kind of proceeding most people ignored, which was why it mattered. Graham arrived early with Evan Hart and their attorney Sloan Merritt, sharp eyes, calm voice files arranged like chess pieces. Renee Alvarez entered moments later, posture professional, face unreadable. No Emmy today, Renee said quietly. Never, Graham replied. That was the agreement. The child stayed protected, out of rooms built for pressure. Calder Rusk entered with a team of advisors and a spokesperson who looked like they belonged on a billboard. Calder nodded politely at Graham, as if they were still negotiating a penthouse instead of a principal. Judge Benton took the bench. We are here to determine whether Bright Haven Pathways practices meet the standards required when minors are involved. She looked down at her notes. This court does not care how beautiful the lobby is. A small ripple of discomfort moved through Calder's team. Sloan stood. Your Honor, we request the court maintain the temporary guardianship order and expand independent oversight to all placement pathways connected to Northline transition housing. Calder's counsel responded smoothly. Your Honor, Bright Haven is voluntary. Families consent. The program provides stability. Recent improvements demonstrate our commitment. Judge Benton held up a hand. Consent is only meaningful when it is informed. She turned to the first witness, a hospital patient advocate appointed under the court's order. The advocate explained plainly how delays had occurred because verification loops kept restarting. No villains named, no melodrama, just the same word again, delayed. Judge Benton asked, were these delays medically justified? The advocate answered carefully. The procedure was appropriate. The delay was administrative. Next came a community housing counselor, someone who didn't look like an activist, just tired. The counselor described how families were often given dense packets during high-stress moments. We encourage quick decisions, the counselor admitted, eyes down, because housing availability changes fast. Judge Benton leaned forward. And what happens when families request time? The counselor hesitated. They're told opportunities are limited, no threats, no force, just pressure dressed as logistics. Calder's attorney stood. Your Honor, this is standard in housing transitions. Judge Benton replied, then standard requires reform. Sloan presented a simplified summary of Brighthaven forms, highlighting language that sounded like choice but functioned like a funnel. She didn't accuse. She compared. Recommended placement becomes preferred placement, Sloan said, and preferred becomes expected. Families think they're saying yes to support. They don't realize they're signing away alternatives. Calder rose to speak directly. Your Honor, we take pride in helping children. We offer structure, education, meals, mentorship. We are not a detention facility. We are not punitive. We are not harmful. Judge Benton's eyes narrowed slightly. I did not accuse you of harm. I questioned your safeguards. Calder paused, thrown off by how precisely she held the line. Renee testified next. She spoke as an investigator, not an accuser. She described patterns in referrals, how quickly the same names appeared when a building was slated for transition, how families who asked questions often ended up with extra steps. Extra steps, Judge Benton repeated. Renee nodded. More appointments, more forms, more waiting. Delayed had cousins. The judge turned to Graham. Mr. Vale, you're not family. Yet you pursued legal guardianship. Why? Graham stood. He didn't speak like a hero. He spoke like a man naming a fact. Because a child shouldn't have to be extraordinary to deserve ordinary protection, he said. Emmy wasn't asking for rescue. She was offering me shelter in a storm. That told me everything. Calder looked down at his hands. For the first time, his composure looked less like confidence and more like calculation. Judge Benton set her pen down. This court will maintain the temporary guardianship. The child remains protected. The grandmother's recovery remains monitored. She looked at Calder. Brighthaven will remain operational only under enhanced oversight and revised consent standards. Independent advocates will be allowed. Communication plans must be transparent. Referrals must be reviewable. Calder's counsel started to object. Judge Benton lifted a hand again. And one more thing, she said calmly. No party will publicly identify the child involved in these proceedings. Not in press releases, not in speeches, not in community updates. Her gaze pinned the room. Children are not marketing. When the hearing ended, cameras waited outside. Graham did not step into them. He stepped away. Because the point was never to win the room. The point was to protect the child who would never have to sit in it. The first sound that greeted Graham when he returned home was laughter. Small laughter, bright, surprised, new. He paused in the entryway, coat still on, as if he didn't want to disturb it. Mrs. Dalloway appeared quietly, delighted. She's in the sunroom, she whispered. We're doing art. Graham walked toward the sound. Emmy sat at a low table covered in paper and washable markers. She wore a soft sweater with tiny stitched stars. Her hair was neatly brushed, still a little wild at the ends, like it refused to stop being 5. On the paper, a city. But not the kind of city brochures loved. Emmy's city had tall buildings and small houses in the same frame. It had a library, a bakery, a place labeled in big letters, help room. Graham crouched beside her. What's the help room? Emmy looked up, proud. A place where you don't have to be lost first. Graham felt his throat tighten, not with sadness, not with fear, just the sharpness of meaning. Evan Hart entered behind him, phone in hand. Judge Benton's order is already in motion, he said. Independent advocates assigned. Brighthaven consent revisions due within days. And the hospital. Graham's eyes lifted. Nana June Evans' expression softened. Procedure scheduled, confirmed. The medical advocate is watching the process. Emmy stopped coloring. Her marker hovered over the paper like a tiny airplane waiting to land. Is Nana coming home? She asked. Graham didn't promise what he couldn't control. He promised what he could. She's getting the care she needs, he said. And when she's ready, we'll be ready. Emmy nodded seriously, then added, I want to show her the help room. Mrs. Dalloway brought hot tea for the adults and apple slices for Emmy. The house felt impossibly normal. Not perfect, not quiet. Alive. Renee called in the early evening. Her voice was steady. The community center director, Tessa Monroe, is willing to meet. She has lists, timelines, family notes. Not sensational, just thorough, Good Graham said. We do it properly. Renee continued. Also, Northline wants to partner with a new community initiative. They're trying to get ahead of the oversight narrative. Graham looked at Emmy's drawing again. Help room, library, bakery. He could almost see it in real life, a place that didn't feel like a program, but like a neighborhood breathing again. Let them, Graham said. But we set the terms. Evan raised an eyebrow. You're thinking bigger than guardianship. Graham's voice lowered. If a 5-year-old can be this responsible in a storm, then adults can be responsible when the weather clears. He didn't say savior. He didn't say legacy. He didn't say redemption. He said responsibility again because it was the only word that held up under daylight. Later, when Emmy was getting ready for bed, she brought Graham a book from the shelf, one Mrs. Dalloway had picked, with a bright cover and soft pages. Read, Emmy asked. Graham blinked. I'm not great at voices. Emmy considered this. Just your voice is okay. So Graham sat on the edge of the bed, not too close, respectful of space, and opened the book. Outside, the city was still cold. Snow still lined the streets like quiet reminders. But inside the room, the air was warm. And as Graham read, he realized something he hadn't expected. The most powerful thing he'd done all week wasn't a legal filing or a court argument. It was showing a child without speeches, without drama, that safety could be steady, that grown-ups could be consistent, that promises could be made carefully and kept. When the story ended, Emmy yawned and hugged her blanket. Max, she started, then corrected herself, cheeks pink. Graham. Yes. Emmy's eyes fluttered heavy with sleep. Thank you for the warm way. Graham swallowed. You showed me where it was. And as he turned off the light, he understood the storm had changed the city. But the quiet choices afterward, those were changing the future. The hospital room looked brighter than Graham remembered, not because the lights had changed, but because Nana June had. Color had returned to her face, not fully, not dramatically, but enough to tell a different story. A story that was moving forward. Emmy stood beside the bed, holding Nana's hand with both of hers, as if afraid that letting go might slow time again. You're warm, Emmy said softly. That's the medicine working, Nana, June replied, smiling. And good people helping. She looked at Graham, then not with suspicion, not with gratitude heavy enough to embarrass him, but with calm understanding. You kept her safe, Nana June said. Graham nodded. She did most of that herself. Emmy smiled proudly. The doctor explained the next steps clearly. Recovery, monitoring. A few more days before discharge. No rushed decisions. No vague delays. Everything had a plan now. Outside the room, Evan Hart and Renee Alvarez spoke quietly about logistics, temporary housing support, medical follow-ups, legal transitions that would return full guardianship to Nana June when appropriate. Nothing dramatic, just steady. That afternoon, Graham stood in the hallway looking at a blank wall that would soon hold a notice, Community Support Room, open daily. It wasn't a brand. It wasn't a headline. It was a door. At home that evening, Emmy helped Mrs. Dalloway bake bread. Flour dusted the counter. Emmy giggled when she left handprints everywhere. "This is messy," she announced. "That's how real things are," Mrs. Dalloway replied. Graham watched from the doorway again, realizing he'd spent most of his life building spaces meant to impress. This one mattered more. Later, Emmy brought him a folded paper. Inside was her city drawing again, updated. She'd added one more building, a small house, a big heart over it. "That's Nana's," she said. Graham swallowed. "It's perfect," no, Emmy corrected gently. "It's safe." And that he understood was the highest compliment. The announcement came quietly. No press conference, no ribbon cutting. Just a line on a community bulletin board and a simple website update: the North Line transition process has been revised. Independent advocates are now present at all family decision points. Some people noticed. Most didn't. That was fine. Because change that lasted didn't need applause. Graham met with community leaders not to speak but to listen. Housing counselors explained what families actually needed. Doctors explained how timing affected recovery. Teachers explained how children reacted to uncertainty. Everything pointed to the same truth: people didn't need saving. They needed space to choose. The community support room opened in a converted neighborhood building that had once been marked for future redevelopment. Now it held long tables, warm lights, and quiet corners. No forms shoved forward, no deadlines whispered. Just options explained clearly. Emmy visited with Nana June one afternoon, holding her hand as they stepped inside. "This is the help room," Emmy told her proudly. Nana June looked around, eyes shining. "It's beautiful. It listens," Emmy said. Graham stayed near the door, deliberately in the background. A reporter approached him later, microphone ready. "Do you consider this your legacy?" she asked. Graham shook his head. "No." "Then what is it?" He thought of a bus shelter in a blizzard, a paper cup, a child offering shelter instead of asking for it. "It's responsibility," he said. Passed forward. The reporter waited for more. There wasn't any. That night, Graham returned to his quiet house, not empty anymore, just lived in. Emmy sat on the floor, sorting crayons. "Nana says we're going home soon," she said. "That's good," Graham replied. "You'll still visit?" she added. "I hope so," he said honestly. She considered that. "Hope is okay." "Yes," Graham agreed. "It is." Outside, the city moved on. Snow melted into gutters. Streets returned to noise and speed. But inside the help room, and inside a few careful decisions, something stayed. Spring came quietly, no announcement, just lighter coats, softer air. Nana June's new apartment overlooked a small park. Nothing fancy, clean, warm, close to the community center. Emmy ran ahead, pointing. "That bench is mine." Nana laughed. "We'll share." Graham visited once a week, sometimes with books, sometimes just to sit. He didn't bring solutions anymore. He brought time. One afternoon, Emmy handed him a new drawing. It showed the city again, but now the snow was gone. The buildings stood side by side, no walls between them, no arrows pushing people away. At the center, the help room. "Why is it still there?" Graham asked. Emmy shrugged. "Storms come back." That was true, but now there was a place to stand when they did. Graham walked home through the city he thought he knew. It looked different, not richer, not poorer, just more visible. He passed a bus shelter, the same kind. Wind rattled the glass lightly. A sign had been added beneath the old one. "Warming, stop helpers, check here first." He stopped for a moment, not because he was lost, but because he remembered what it felt like to be found. That night, he sat at his desk and turned his watch face down. Some habits didn't need to return. Across the city, Emmy fell asleep easily, Nana June reading beside her. "You did good," Nana whispered. Emmy smiled sleepily. So did he. Outside, the city breathed. The storm was gone, but the lesson stayed. Sometimes the smallest voice in the cold isn't asking for rescue. It's offering a way forward, And sometimes all it takes to change everything is choosing to stop and listen. Did this story leave a lasting impression on you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, rate it from 1 to 10, and tap the end screen to see another heartwarming story waiting for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, then tap the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Until our next story.